Welcome back. We are looking at chapter 3 of A Place Called Perfect. And chapter 3 is titled The Spectacle Maker's Emporium. The sun warmed Violet's face, pulling her gently from her dreams as it shone in her bedroom window. She'd slept like a log in her new bed. She'd already stretched and sat up before she realised something was wrong. She could faintly see the edges of her room, but everything straight in front of her was covered by a big black blob, as if ink had leaked all over her eyes. She rubbed them, but nothing changed. She still couldn't see. Her heartbeat quickened. She stuck her foot out of the duvet and stretched for the floor. "Ouch!" she yelled, smacking her toe off something solid as she walked blindly towards the door. "Mum!" "Violet, what is it?" croaked her dad's sleepy voice. A sudden crash shook the house. "Eugene!" her mother cried. "Eugene, what's happened? Are you okay?" Violet gingerly felt her way out the door and down the hall to her parents' room. She stumbled inside. "Mum, I can't see." "Neither can I, pet," her father replied, his voice strangely cheerful. "But it's nothing to panic about. We were warned." "They didn't say it would happen this soon, Eugene," her mother called. "No need to panic, girls," he repeated, his voice now a little high-pitched. "Violet, come over and get into bed with your mother. I'll go downstairs and see if I can get hold of the Archers. They'll know what to do." "But how, Eugene? You can't see either," her mother sobbed. "Don't worry about me," he replied, walking into Violet as she crawled across their bedroom carpet. "Dad, watch out!" Violet shouted, breaking her vows silence only because it was an emergency. "Oh, what a good idea, pet," her dad said, easing himself stiffly onto his knees. "I'll be back soon with help. Trust me." Violet's father crawled across the room and out into the hall. Trust him? He didn't deserve her trust. This was all his fault. "Ow!" she cried as she banged into the side of her parents' bed. "Are you okay, pet?" her mum called from above. Violet rubbed her forehead and searched for blood. "Yes, I think so," she moaned, crawling into the empty space beside Rose. The mattress was still warm and the sheets smelled like her dad. She wriggled over closer to her mum. "Good morning," a voice called from below her parents' window. "Isn't it a glorious day, Family Brown?" "Mum, there's someone outside." "I know, pet. Stay here," her mother whispered, getting up from the bed. Rose stumbled across the room, then the window squeaked and cold air tickled Violet's toes where they stuck out from beneath the duvet. "Hello?" Rose called. "Oh, good morning, Mrs. Brown. I just stopped by to see how your first day is going and to offer Eugene a lift to work." "Oh, it's you, Mr. Archer," her mother gasped. "What a godsend you are. I'm afraid we've all woken up a little worse for wear. The effects of the sun came on sooner than expected." "Oh no, that's a pity. Sometimes it happens that way. Not to worry, we'll have you back to normal in no time." In a few minutes, Mr. Edward Archer, it was definitely him because he was almost the same height as Violet, led Eugene, Rose and Violet carefully out of the house and into the back of his car. "Now, on to our Spectacle Maker's Emporium," he called as the engine whistled into life. Violet had always thought a spectacle meant that she was doing something wrong, as her mother often told her to stop making a spectacle of herself. Now she discovered it also meant glasses. Emporium was more difficult, but she had a feeling it was just a posh word for a shop. The Archers seemed to like posh words. As Mr. Archer slowly led her by the arm out of the car, Violet decided she never wanted to be blind again. She liked seeing. Although she missed colour and longed for blue or purple or pinky yellow, it wasn't anything that wasn't or anything that wasn't black and fuzzy. Even brown would do. "Mr. Archer," she said, a thought suddenly hitting her, "we haven't been in the sun yet, so how could it affect our eyes?" "It was streaming in your window all morning, dear," Edward Archer replied. "But—" "Some people are very sensitive to it, Violet," he interrupted, squeezing her upper arm so tight she thought he might sever it off. She squirmed away, just a little, as her toe hit something solid. "Ow!" she squealed, lifting her foot off the ground. Oh, silly me, I forgot to mention the steps, Edward Archer said, easing his grip. Holding Edward's elbow tight, she gingerly inched up the 5 wide steps. Then, suddenly, the black got blacker and she stumbled. Oh, don't worry, dear, we're just coming inside. That's why the light has changed a little, he laughed. Violet smiled as politely as possible. She'd half decided already, but his face made it fact. She hated Edward Archer almost as much as his brother. Now, I'm just going to lower you into this chair, he said, grabbing her hands and easing her backwards. She winced as the cold leather touched her bare legs. She was still wearing her short pyjamas, the furry love heart pair. She blushed, picturing the pink and red pattern. She'd told her mum she was getting too old for love hearts, but parents never listen. I'm just going to get your mother and father, dear, Edward Archer called, his footsteps fading into the distance. Silence filled the shop. Sometimes Violet liked silence, but not now. Blindness made silence scary. She pushed her hands under her thighs and swung her legs, trying to remember a happy song. Suddenly she heard faint footsteps enter the shop at speed, growing louder as they paced towards her. She looked blindly in the direction of the sound. I need to speak to your dad, a voice whispered in her right ear. Who's there? She gasped. Then heavier footsteps entered the shop. I've caught you now, you mangy orphan, a different voice panted. A chase ensued. Someone raced behind Violet's chair, hitting the wood and rocking it sideways before both sets of footsteps ran back out of the door and faded off into the distance. Who's there? She cried, gripping tightly to the arms of her chair. Violet, what are you doing? This voice she recognised. It was George Archer. Somebody was in the shop. There was a chase. Really? He replied, sounding worried. Did you see them? What did they look like? No, she said quickly, I can't see, but I heard them, and one of them whispered in my ear. Ah, George Archer laughed, you've gone blind already. Losing one's sight can play havoc with one's hearing, you know. No, there really was someone here. I didn't imagine it, I swear, Violet insisted. No, there wasn't, George snapped, stopping the conversation dead. Other familiar voices entered the shop. Mum, is that you? She said, leaning out of her chair. Someone grabbed her shoulders, pulling her back. Lots of glass to be broken here, Violet dear, George Archer snarled behind her. Violet, don't worry, we're here, pet, her dad soothed from somewhere on the left. She wanted to reply, but couldn't. Silence hung in the air for a moment, and then Edward Archer spoke. Now, you're first, Violet, he said. It sounded like he was standing directly in front of her. I do hope these fit. If not, we can adjust them. You have a rather large head for someone so young. Violet winced and closed her eyes as a pair of glasses was shoved roughly onto the bridge of her nose. Warm, sweaty hands cupped her face and adjusted the frames. The arms of the glasses felt a little chunky and uncomfortable behind her ears. Now, Edward said, tell us what you see. Violet held her breath. What if she was still blind? Slowly, she opened her eyes and gasped. Colour filled her vision. Rich brown from the shining dark wood that panelled the walls of the shop, deep red from the thick carpet at her feet, and bright gold from the rows of spectacles that rested inside sparkling glass cabinets. It was the poshest place she'd ever seen. Is something wrong? Edward asked. No, Violet stammered, looking around. It's just, I'd never been anywhere quite like this before. It's amazing. A look of pride passed between the brothers. We try our best, Edward smirked. She sat in her chair and watched the twins search for cabinets for glasses to fit her parents. All the frames were the same, rectangular, gold-rimmed and delicate, with rose-tinted lenses. There was something unusual about the arms and where the glasses hooked in behind the ears. It was flat, boxy and rectangular, in contrast to the delicate frame. Violet adjusted hers. They were pinching the sides of her head. Try to leave them alone, will you? George snarled as he caught her fiddling with her specs. She sat on her hands and watched the Archers hover around her parents for a few minutes. Then, sure the twins were distracted, She slipped off the chair and looked round. Everything in the shop was shiny. She could see herself in the gold handles of the glass cabinet doors that filled the wall in front of her from floor to ceiling. Edward Archer, trying to reach a pair of glasses in the top cabinet, was perched on top of a huge wooden ladder with his back to her. There was a panelled wall to her left, and Violet noticed a thin thread of light leaking through a gap in the dark wood. She walked to the wall and gently pushed on the polished panel. It opened inwards to a secret room. She stepped inside and found herself in a library, its dark wooden shelves lined with books. The doors were old and some were so worn it was impossible to read their spines. They were the type her dad loved, the sort that he said told a story, not just on the pages, but about the people who owned them before. Her mum said that meant they were second-hand and smelly. Violet pulled some books out. First, An Optical Illusion, then Blind Man's Bluff, and finally, Seeing Things. All the books were the same. They were all about eyes. She was reaching for another one when she heard a voice behind her. "Don't even think about it." She turned on the spot and froze. George Archer stood in front of her. "Perfect kids must act perfectly," he barked. "There you are, George," Edward Archer said, peeping his head round the panelled door. "I see you've found Violet. We were worried, dear." Violet raced past Edward back into the shop and the safety of her mother's side. She studied the Archers from behind Rose's chair as the brothers carried on fitting her parents' glasses. Oddly, Edward didn't seem as small as before. His head wasn't as large either, and his eyes were hardly bulging. George, too, had changed. He didn't look overly long. His eyes fitted his face, and his arms and legs weren't so spindly. He even stood tall without bending his head. They were small changes, but added together, they meant the Archers didn't look quite so ugly. You could even say they looked nice. It didn't mean she was starting to like them, though. Her parents both wore gold-rimmed glasses now, too. Rose looked lovely, but she had always been beautiful, everybody said so, and Violet hoped someday they'd say the same about her. Her dad looked handsome, too. He even seemed to have more hair. They were the perfect couple. Why hadn't she noticed it before? "Violet," her mum said as they left the shop, "those glasses really suit you, pet. You're beautiful." Perfect was sending them all a little mushy, but Violet still wasn't falling for it. She didn't like the town for making her blind, and she definitely didn't like the Archers, especially George, who seemed pretty angry most of the time. Standing on the steps outside the Archers' Emporium, she lifted up her specs and looked around. Everything was a fuzzy, dark mess. She dropped her glasses back over her eyes and her sight returned. She tried it a few more times and shivered. Without their glasses, the three of them would see nothing at all. The same had to be true for everyone else who lived in the town. As far as Violet was concerned, this wasn't her idea of perfect. That's the end.